I remember the sound first, the hollow, high-pitched gasp that cut through the laughter and music like a thin blade. For a moment, it was an odd, misplaced note in the chorus of the family party. Trays clinking, children shrieking over a balloon, someone yelling a joke, my cousin's voice on the porch asking for another beer. I will never forget. My daughter, Ava, behind me, hands to her face, trying to catch a breath through a storm of crying. I turned. The room seemed to tilt. Her scalp gleamed where hair should have been. Pale skin, exposed, an oblong of bare head where there had been soft brown curls that fell to her shoulders just 2 nights before. The front fringe, the sides, an uneven line at the nape. Someone had cut it all off. It was sloppy and cruel, like a ransom note written by a child with dull scissors. For a second, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. Then the words came, not through my ears, but through my bones. The sickening certainty that someone in this room had done this. Had laughed while she slept. Had done it like shaving a puppet for sport. Mom, Ava's voice sounded thin and far away. She had been 15 for 2 months. Pretty in the awkward, luminous way teenagers are. A crooked smile, a freckled nose, an old sweater she wore with a kind of stubbornness. She wasn't a doll for people to mutilate. My sister stood by the fireplace, wine glass hanging from a finger, an expression I have seen 100 times, a calculated smirk you don't see unless you know how to look for venom. Her name is Monica, tall, expensive coat, an accent that never quite left even after she moved back from the city, as if style could anesthetize cruelty. Next to her, my mother clutched a napkin that trembled between manicured fingers. I saw the way both women looked at my daughter, not with horror, but with a kind of impatient amusement, as though they were watching an act in which they were somehow entitled to a role. "Oh, come on," Monica said, breathy as if this were a punchline. "It's a joke. Relax. Put some water on her neck. It'll grow back. You're dramatic, Lila." Everyone else moved a beat behind me like the world had slipped its moorings. Some laughed nervously. Others exchanged looks, waiting for me to coddle the situation into comfortable shapes again. The music kept playing because music is what people do when they are embarrassed. Drown the moment. I went to Ava like a wind. I put my hands on her shoulders, felt how they trembled, and pulled her into my arms. Her cheek was warm against my collarbone. She smelled of the lemon cake she'd helped frost earlier. Her hair in my hands was the scraped silk of grief. "You did this," I said, voice low. It was beyond accusation. It was an observation. The sight lines were simple. Whoever had the access, the audacity, the private, cruel patience to wait until she slept, Monica had the history of doing such things. She never liked when anyone else became the center. That had been her pattern since we were children. Blink and snatch, make light of the snatch, then crow over it. Monica flounced her hand through the air. It was a prank, Lila. A harmless prank. God, she'll be fine. My mother's voice was smaller than I expected. "Oh, Lord, you poor thing," she said, but her eyes hovered on the wine, on Monica's heels. She murmured the words without the force of conviction. I did the only thing I could think of. I slapped Monica. It was not a cinematic wind-up, but a necessary animal response. A strike that crossed the line between being civilized and being human. The slap landed with the crisp sound of all history hitting the present. Monica's mouth opened, more in surprise than in pain, and then the laugh that had been poised there faltered. In the room, I heard the shift. People stepping into positions, some ready to make excuses, others to make statements. "You don't," Monica started, and her voice brimmed with the insult she intended. But I didn't wait to see the rest of it. I gathered Ava to me, wrapped arms around her small shoulders, and walked out the sliding door into the night. The backyard air was numb with early winter. The fairy lights on the patio made halos I didn't want to look at. I carried my daughter to the car and buckled her in, the seatbelt touching her bare neck. She whimpered into the fleece I had brought for her school trip a week earlier. On the drive home, the radio played songs about distance, the world's indifference doling out its own soundtrack. I wanted to throttle the world and then tenderly stitch my child back together, to fix what had been done as though I could. There was a bruise blooming at the temple of my anger, an ache that had nothing to do with the physical. We spent the night in the emergency clinic because there are certain small formalities that serve as slow, legal anchors. A nurse's note recording a minor head trauma from a blunt object could later stand as witness to harm. The doctor said Ava was lucky. The cuts were superficial, and the scalp would heal. But she would be humiliated in a way parents can't anesthetize. 15-year-olds are merciless when invited. When we went home the next morning, the house felt like a stage set after the show has closed. Monica's absence was a presence. She had left in the night, perhaps to avoid witnesses, perhaps to craft her alibi, perhaps to derail the narrative before it could coalesce. My mother, however, was there at the kitchen table, hands clasped around a mug, the TV murmuring in the background. She looked up as we entered, her face a map of fatigue and something else, something I couldn't name at first. "Lila," she said, and the tone was small, urgent, sticky with need. "Please. For God's sake, please." Her voice broke down into a mess of syllables. She reached for my hand with both of hers, and for a moment I thought this was the apology that would unspool, a long-needed confession and admission. I was wrong, she would say. How could she have let us go? But the minute hope lifted, it was replaced with a new, colder reality. Her palms trembled like someone pressing an open wound. "My Monica, you don't understand. She needs a way to live." I stared at her, at the pallor of her features, at the desperation. "What do you mean?" Mom's eyes flicked to Ava, to the dirty tufts on the pillow, to the sketchbooks scattered like talismans. "She can't keep working," Mom whispered. She looked away, hands tearing at the napkin. "She doesn't manage her things. The city job is gone. She'll lose everything." Momentarily, the room spun. I had lived barely 20 minutes from this truth. The woman who shaved my child's head could be facing ruin, maybe not physically, but socially. And my mother was begging me to help her. "Why are you asking me?" I asked. "After last night?" Mom's voice crumpled. "Because I can't. I need to protect both of you. I don't want Monica to be homeless." "Protect?" Her voice trembled with something that looked like pleading but smelled like calculation. "You're asking me to help the woman who assaulted my child?" My voice was steady but small. I felt like a puppet who had just cut a string and now had to explain to the person who had pulled it why it would not dance anymore. "Please," my mother said, hot tears pooling in the corners of her eyes. "You don't understand what it's like. We can't be poor. We have reputations. Monica, she hasn't learned. Give her a way to live." My mind cataloged everything. Lies withheld, a pattern of neglect, the way Monica's cruelty had fed on attention, the way my mother had always smoothed the edges of her daughter's misbehavior and punished mine. The word reputation echoed like a drumbeat. For my mother, appearances were the currency of survival. For Monica, deeds had often been currency she spent at pleasure. I had a choice, then. I could operate from fury and make them pay, from righteous dismantling, from the species of revenge that is loud and irreversible. Or I could build a different kind of retribution, one that would leave scars but also teach. Revenge stories usually end in ruin for someone. I think they're satisfying when the scales of justice tip where they failed. But I wanted my daughter to heal, not to watch another life sink into ruin and wonder whether I had traded one trauma for another. My mind moved like water in a fierce river, cold, quick, and determined. "I will help her," I said finally, and my voice surprised me more than it surprised her. "But not in the way you want." My mother exhaled like someone knotted had finally been untied. "Yes, you begged me," I said, and every word was a hammer. "So I'll give you a route. You will not tell Monica about it. You will not go to her with sympathy, as you always have. You will tell her this is a program I am enrolling her in. She will attend therapy, community service, and an accountable work placement. She will meet with a counselor twice a week to address what she did and why she did it. If she fails to complete the program, no help. She will be turned over to authorities for harassment and assault with intent to humiliate. She will lose all claim to family support." My mother's eyes widened until they were almost comical. "Lila," she started, then faltered. "That's cruel." "No," I said. "It's conditional. It's structure. She ruins people when she believes there are no consequences. You have enabled her. This won't be pity, it will be repair." Mom looked at the worn counter, at the tea cooling in her mug. Her lips thinned. "You always were the stubborn one. And you always were the one who hid their nastiness behind a manicure," I said softly. "But we both love Monica, imperfectly. She is still our sister/daughter. She can be helped, but only if she accepts responsibility." She nodded slowly, the way someone stepping into quicksand goes slowly to test the depth. "You promise?" "I promise this," I said. "I will help her rebuild in a manner that makes it impossible for her to hurt anyone again, because she'll have to face what she did. I will not let this slide. And if she most insists on being cruel, then consequences will follow." For the next weeks, I cooked a plan that was a cross between therapy and scaffolding. I hired an attorney who specializes in family and juvenile matters. The woman, Asha, was clinical and kind, with a steel taste for evidence. We documented what had happened: Ava's wounds, the clinic note, witnesses who'd heard Monica laughing in the living room at 2 in the morning. Asha advised caution. She explained how charges could be pursued, but that the collateral damage might be permanent and the law wouldn't necessarily match the moral ledger we sought to balance. We enrolled Monica in a restorative program first, a sort of alternative justice that would involve mediated apology sessions, community service at the shelter where traumatized teenagers came for care, and counseling. I wasn't naive enough to think it would be a balm for Ava. The wounds ran deep. But we wanted Monica to look into the eyes of people she had treated like consumable entertainment. We wanted her to understand that humiliation is not a temporary fashion statement. It's a stamp that can last generations. Monica raged, of course. She called me every name in the book, shrilling about betrayal and jealousy. She demanded money, house keys, and her share of inherited assets that were never her own. My mother called daily, sometimes pleading like a woman in prayer, sometimes bargaining like a merchant. I spoke less. I let the attorney and the court lay down the rules. Sign here, attend therapy, show up for service days. On the first day Monica crossed the threshold of the shelter where I volunteered, she stumbled as if she had expected applause. A woman with a shaved head was there, but her hair was gone by choice. Not by cruelty. She had lost her hair to chemotherapy and exuded a bravery that left Monica pale. Volunteers moved about with long, efficient kindness. Monica glared and then stood still as the coordinator explained how this was not punishment but reconnection. Here, dignity is restored by work and presence. The sessions were ugly. Monica learned that humiliation creates reverberations. She learned this when a teenager she had once mocked stared into her face and said, "You don't get to be shocked. We didn't laugh last night. You did." For once, Monica's defenses pushed no comeback. She left early and sat in her car sobbing as if grief had finally arrived late to the party. She came back the next day, and the next. Months of attendance, months of therapy, and the slimmest, most fragile apologies began to appear, like tentative shoots in a burned forest. Monica started to understand the architecture of people's fear and pain. She began to clean with intention, to listen with intent, to apologize without qualifiers. My mother, who had been clutching at reputation like a life preserver, had to learn to stop smoothing and start listening. As for Ava, she refused to let the incident make her timid. She wore scarves, hats, that first winter, and then one day she walked into the kitchen with hair grown in a stubborn, shaggy pixie. Still a statement, but now her own. With counseling and our late-night talks, candles burned low, drawing exercises spread across the table, her character folded and expanded into something like courage. She forgave later, and because she forgave, it was not a headlong rush but a slow release, one that did not require Monica's rehabilitation as a precondition. When Monica completed the program, she came to the house on a rainy evening, soaked to the bones, carrying a plate of the exact cookies Grandma used to make. She looked older, not in age, but in the way her eyes no longer skittered when someone else took center stage. She read a letter aloud that we had written together with a counselor. She had to admit the harm, explain why she did it, ask for repair. Her voice shook. "I am sorry for what I did to Ava," she said. I thought I was clever. I thought." She trailed off, hands pressed together. We didn't hug at first. But later, when the storm had stopped and the cookies were eaten, Monica sat with us and we watched Ava sketch in silence, and something like a family settled into a new contour, less elegant, more honest. Monica didn't get her old life back. She never would. But she got a route forward that required labor, empathy, and accountability. She worked for the shelter, and over the years she found in that work something like redemption. My mother, who had begged me to save her daughter's life, learned to stop asking me to prop up monsters for the sake of appearances. She learned to protect her granddaughter, to value the life that did not owe penance for her own mistakes. The most satisfying revenge is not always the one that breaks the other person. It's the one that reorders the world so that cruelty no longer yields the dividend it once did. I wanted Monica to understand that taking joy in someone else's ruin raises your own risk of collapse. I wanted her to be forced to watch the consequences of that joy and to choose differently. Years later, on a spring morning when the house hummed happily and Ava had thick hair again, I found a little note tucked into my sketchbook. It was from Monica. "Thank you for not letting me set fire to everything. I am sorry for what I did. I am trying bit by bit. I put the note in my pocket and walked outside. The light had just begun to warm the driveway. I looked at my daughter, sketching butterflies on the porch steps. She was protected now, stronger for the storm we had weathered. If revenge had a flavor, it was not molasses or bile, but a quiet, resolute sweetness, justice that mended as it measured. Mom learned to stop cursing the world and started to coddle the right person. She coddled our family's repair. Monica learned to stop thinking of people as scenes and began to see them as stories. And I learned that mercy is a power more redemptive than the quickest ruination. I had wanted to break her, to expose her. Instead, I rebuilt the boundary around our lives so that cruelty could not walk back in, and I made sure that when it left with a lesson to last.